Hi everyone, this is Pastor Anthony and welcome back to VBS on the Trail Parents Edition. We'll continue, jump right into the event in John chapter 11 with the death and resurrection of Lazarus. It begins with Lazarus himself. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with the anointment. Verse 3, so the sisters sent to Jesus, who's pretty far away at the time, Lord, he whom you love is ill. So they know that means Lazarus. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Now this illness will lead to death, but not death, not a permanent death this time. Jesus knows the intent here, that he will resurrect him for the ultimate glory of God. Now 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. And after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. It's time to go. The disciples said, well, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to kill you. Are you going there again? And Jesus said, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Right? He says, I will do what needs to be accomplished. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I want to go wake him up. And so this is why it's not an illness that leads to death. He's dead, but Jesus intends to wake him up or resurrect him. The disciples said, well, if he's asleep, he'll get better. And Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought it meant something else, right? And so Jesus says, look, Lazarus has died, and it's for your sake that I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go. And so Thomas called the twins, said to his disciples, let's go, and we'll all die with him, right? Because they know that Jesus has already been threatened with stoning, that they seek to arrest him and crucify him, that all this is in the background. But Christ also knows that this has to happen in the way that God has planned it and directed it. Now he gets there, and he is met by both Mary and Martha at this time. So while he's journeying up, word comes ahead of them that Jesus is on his way. It says in verse 20, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So she knows you could have saved him. This isn't an accusation. This isn't necessarily out of anger. This is her speaking out of her grief, a truth. If you were here, he would have lived. But, verse 22, even now I know, whatever you ask from God, God will give you. I know you're still a stand-up guy. I know whatever God asked of you and you asked of God, it was the right thing to have accomplished. Jesus says to her, verse 23, your brother will rise again. And Martha goes, yeah, I know. He'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. She's still not getting the full picture. Death is so permanent. Now, we are very often removed from death. Not that we don't suffer through it, not that we haven't had people that died in our lives, but death is such a far removed thing in our culture. We go to a funeral home. We maybe do 1 or 2 visitations. We have a funeral service. We bury the body outside. Everything is in the cemetery. Everything is separate from us. And we kind of keep this death almost like a temporary thing, an illusion that we don't have to think about very often. But death was very real, very in your face, and caused great and deep pain for a very long time for these people because they were faced with it every day, the possibility and the reality of death right before them. And so even when Jesus says this, she's thinking, yeah, at the end. Now it's interesting here that previously we've talked about the physical world and the spiritual world. And when Jesus is talking about the spiritual world, people in the physical world have trouble understanding it. What's amazing here is Jesus talking about a physical resurrection that's going to take place, but she's so spiritually minded, she's not seeing the reality of the intent here. People don't come back from the dead, right? It's permanent. And so when he has said this, she went and called her sister Mary and talked to her in private and says, look, the teacher's asking for you outside. Mary stays distant from him for some reason. We don't know. She's in her grief. She's in her sorrow. Jesus doesn't get angry or upset, but he does ask for her personally to see her. And so in this moment, she gets up and she goes outside. And again, she says the same thing. The teacher is calling you. When she heard it, she rose quickly, went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place with Martha. The Jews in the house were consoling her. They saw Mary rise, and they thought, oh, she's going to go visit Lazarus at the tomb. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. This might be a little more accusatory. But Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping. It says he was deeply moved. And the word is, he was moved in his innermost being, his guts. His spirit was greatly troubled, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And then we have here, Jesus wept. There's no reason for this. Logically, there's no reason for this. He knew days ahead of time that Lazarus was going to die. He knew days ahead of time that he would resurrect him. He just told Martha he was going to do this. He was going to bring him back to life, whether she understood it or not. And yet, when he's confronted with the tomb of Lazarus and the pain of all the people on account of his death, in grief and in sorrow, he weeps. Now, he does not weep to make them feel better. He's not faking it. He's not pretending. He weeps out of genuine brokenheartedness. Now, why? Why? He's going to resurrect Lazarus. They're all going to be happy very soon. Well, because Lazarus is going to die again. Because death is a very real and painful experience to these people that have to grieve and mourn and be in sorrow. And the reason that death exists in the first place is because sin does. Jesus weeps because this is the condition of man, that we are sinful and separated from God. And he weeps seeing that and the pain and sorrow that it brings to them. It doesn't matter if Lazarus is going to be resurrected. He's going to die again. These people will die eventually. And they will be lost in their sin. Well, not with him. But this is what sin does. It brings death. It brings pain. It brings sorrow and grief. And seeing that moves him and brings him to tears. It says, so the Jews said, look how much he loved him. Look how much he's crying. And then some are accusing. Could not one who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? But that's not the point. That Lazarus had to die so that the next events could take place. Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lying against it. So they would put the body in there, and after a couple of weeks, they would anoint it again, take it out, and then put it somewhere else, just for a bit, so people could come and mourn at that area. Lord, by this, Jesus says in verse 39, take away the stone, roll the stone away. And Martha, the sister of the dead man, very practical, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, which in King James is a little better. He says, surely now he stinketh. Surely he stinketh. He's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe you sent me. And so this is one of those prayers, but he's not saying it just to God, although he is. He's saying it so the other people hear him too. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, so you know it's him, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said, unbind him and let him go. Jesus cares for us. Jesus grieves alongside of us. Jesus is grieved by sin and hatefulness and destruction and everything that sin breeds, especially death. But Jesus has provided a way to escape that. Yeah, we're going to die one day, but there is a promise that he makes, that if we confess with our mouths and believe in our heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, that we shall be saved, not from death, but from death, that everlasting separation from God. Instead, we will be brought into eternal life alongside of him. He takes our sins. He takes our pains and our sorrows. He suffers in our place, and he brings us with him into life everlasting. This is an important moment, and this is a very important story, and I would even say a time in your life. And you may think, well, I'm saved. I've been saved since a kid. I've said that prayer. I know what I believe. And that's great. And that's good. And that's important. But it's always good to be reminded of it, to consider the price paid for it, and to remember that in your pain and your sorrow, you're not alone. But Christ cares for you, and He is with you. But for those who maybe don't know, aren't 100% sure, are a little iffy on the whole Jesus thing, know this: He cares for you. He weeps at the condition of the world in sin and pain and sorrow. He wants to be a part of your grief and your life. And that if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, that trust and sincerity that the woman at the well had, that's faith, you will be saved. And that's absolutely true. And so I pray that you consider that and hold that and really know who your God is. One who knows you, one who loves you, one who cares for you and weeps with you. Thank you.